Is the Rolex Datejust becoming obsolete? Fantastic question. This was asked of me by a viewer, and it really made me think. The idea was to address a few points and put them in bullet form and unpack this idea in a bit more detail. This is part one of a two-part series of studying the Rolex Datejust. This part, we aim to address this question a bit more methodically. In part two, we will start looking at the do's and don'ts with Datejusts, how to rank the best and worst models in the line, which should be a lot of fun to put together. So is the Rolex Datejust obsolete or on the verge of becoming obsolete? To address this, we can look at some history, styles, character traits that made this watch so important and influential, and really take it from there. The history of this watch is basic enough. Rolex invented the rotating date window. You don't need anything more substantial than that. It was a huge technological movement. Think about how many watches nowadays have rotating date windows, and thank the Rolex Datejust for that. I mean, that's a marketing statement right there. You can end the discussion. It's been worn by so many influential figures over time. It's been used in film. It's been a style icon for decades. And don't get me wrong, the watch is still extremely popular. Maybe not so much amongst enthusiasts, but we also forget that we are a very small percentage of the world population. And when we think about what the Datejust really managed to introduce, not only a rotating date window, the Cyclops lens, seeing how the fluted bezel was integrated with Jubilee bracelets, oyster bracelets, two-tone finishes, different dials, handsets, numerals. The Rolex Datejust has been instrumental in the process of developing the brand itself. So the history that it has, no denying. Moving on to the next point, when you look at the style of the watch, it is so unique to this model in particular. Of course, it falls in line with the Oyster Perpetual models, but we still see that Oyster case. We see the shared simplicity across the board with many of the pieces. The date complication has always been in the same place. The watches are relatively simple, but in that simplicity they do manage to go different levels to extra lengths, with things like diamond inserts, amazing dial variations, the use of different batons, numerals, plots, and let's not forget sizes and the scales of the pieces. Now really, when we think about the Datejust, we think about the genre, the real person it's targeted towards. You get some that aspire to own the watch because it is one of the icons of the Rolex brand, others who aspire to own them because of family members in the past, possibly. Others believe it is truly representative of the brand, and there is no denying there. And in these categories, we look at the sizing, just how these pieces have been able to accommodate virtually every owner and wearer nowadays. Everything from mid-20s to 40s in millimeters. And it really provides a lot more openness for people to approach the Rolex brand without spending a huge fortune on a watch. That factor is something that hasn't been addressed enough. For someone who is unfamiliar with the brand, many gravitate towards the Datejust and wear it for the rest of their lives with no problem. And there is something quite special in that. Closing in on the real aesthetics of the piece, I think the idea of incorporating a Cyclops lens into the mix, we can argue that the final execution wasn't the most, we could say, perfect and complete iteration of the design. We've seen how other brands have managed to use this technology a lot simpler, where there's less opportunity for it to fall off the crystal, say. But the Cyclops lens and the Datejust are peas in a pod. The watch is able to emphasize its most important feature without needing to say anything else. It's a very special execution that I don't think many other brands have been able to achieve just as well as this. The simpler models with batons on their dials really emphasize this point the best. You're able to see, at a glance, that the date is the focal point. But then it is addressing the core underlying detail, the true relevancy of the Rolex Datejust. Just how relevant is it today compared to other models from the family? What is the hot item? We know that sports watches, more specifically steel sports and the professional models, are the ones that are favored by many. And those are the watches in the line that people aspire to own the most nowadays. A few decades ago, not so much. We've moved into a different era, a different mindset. People like the idea that the watch exhibits this quality of being able to be abused and used hard and heavily, and that the owner can use it without worrying about it. And that's what the modern professional pieces manage to really do. For the majority of 21-year-olds out there, they aspire to own a watch that is extremely rugged, that can be used everywhere. Sadly, the Datejust doesn't exactly exhibit that. The Datejust is a piece that looks more on the dress side of things. It's the kind of watch you could wear every day for the rest of your life, no problem. But then it's a watch that you really want to wear with a suit and tie. No doubt, it rides the line of formality and informality very well, but it still leans more towards the formal, and the huge appeal that it had in the 70s and the 80s isn't as strong as it used to be. But then we also just look across the board. We move away from the Rolex brand, and we look at the state of watches themselves. What do we see the most of? Professional watches. It seems like people really enjoy pieces that have a form of complication to them. Not just something that tells you the time and the date, but something that does have a rotating bezel, or a chronograph, that maybe is less flashy, without fluted bezels and jubilee bracelets. Something that is a bit more understated, that has other features that could be used more practically every day, like a countdown bezel, a GMT complication, a stopwatch. Another element we could address is that nowadays, these are the watches that we find in Rolex showrooms. So it's either choosing an Oyster Perpetual, a Datejust, or not much at all. Again, I'm generalizing, but I hope you get the point. Sadly, these watches just aren't as popular as they used to be, but they always will remain and hold on to something very important and special. Not only do these pieces have an immense history that could never be rewritten, but stylistically they represent the Rolex brand so well. Instantly recognizable, even in their smallest size. All of these models share a few characteristic traits that ties them to the Rolex name. It's amazing to consider that even now, all these decades later, the watch still manages to exude class, elegance, taste, and depending on your preference, it's a watch that really can be tailored to your specific wants and needs, to your specific style. It really is a great question. It had me thinking for a while, and the background to the question was asking things like, are these watches still robust? As robust as the professional models? Could they be worn every day? Used in any environment, taken to the beach, thrown into the ocean? Of course they can. These watches wouldn't bear the Oyster name, the coronet, if they weren't spectacular. So don't think you're underplaying it when you pick up a watch like this. It is one of the most historically significant pieces of the 20th century, and even to this day has an image that will never change.